Diary of a Man in Despair. Friedrich Reck. September 9, 1937.
I have spent several days at Hohenschwangau Castle as a guest of our royal master. Released by my host following long talks lasting far into the night, I tried to get to my room in a distant guest wing, and, wandering through a maze of corridors up and down stairways unable to find the light switches in the unfamiliar surroundings, ended by crouching on a step and so waited, chattering with cold, for dawn. My host related all kinds of stories to me, tales which in these times seemed to come to me from across an immense distance, about the triple-pronged cigar holder intended to hold 3 Havanas which he had seen Bismarck using. Only by smoking 3 cigars at one time could that outsized glutton get the clouds of smoke he wanted, and about the marvelous appetite of the old Kaiser, with whom, shortly before the fateful year of 1888, he had breakfasted. Finally, he told me also of the gloomy and difficult days he had known as an army commander in the World War shortly before the collapse. At that time, September 1918, the whole Army Reserve had shrunk to half a company, and the airmen with the Army Group had a gasoline stockpile of not quite 1,200 liters at their disposal. At the end, my host showed me a photo in the Berliner Illustrierte Zeitung of Herr Göring, that happy family man, pictured in his study with his lady, the former Miss Sunman. They stood before an immense Gobelin tapestry which had been part of the Wittelsbach private collection, and which had brevi manu been stolen just as, probably, were the other items in this representative photograph. The enormous rings on the fingers of the master of the house and the bracelets and earrings on his wife. We spoke of the origins of this dainty fellow, the son of a Rosenheim waitress, who had not succeeded in gaining admission to a Bavarian cadet corps. The application had gone through the hands of the crown prince, and had thereupon been sent off to Prussia. Now, of course, along with a fantastic coat of arms, Herr Göring has had a pedigree drawn up which traces his descent to some Westphalian general of the early Middle Ages. Obviously mentally deranged, he now takes himself to be the King of Prussia in person. An acquaintance of mine, who had occasion to go to Karen Hall recently, saw porcelain nameplates on the doors of the rooms occupied by the divers companions of the former Miss Sunman which read, First Lady in Waiting, Second Lady in Waiting, etc. But this is how they all are with one another, just this way. All of them act the classa dirigenti, have fantastic coats of arms drawn up, compose even more fantastic pedigrees for themselves, and choose their adjutants from among these North German nobility come down in the world who crowd after them just as the type that once followed Bockelson. Herr Göring officially decrees that his wife is to be addressed as, Your Ladyship. Herr Goebbels has some mangy princeling from a Middle German royal family, to pay him homage, and even Herr Himmler, who generally has taken pains to maintain a simple standard of living, is supposed to have a royal vassal in his entourage. But worst of all are the females, these former barmaids, most of whom have passed through any number of hands, who are loaded down with the stolen jewels of noble families, and still can never dispel the aura of their native kitchen milieu. Made up to resemble something midway between a movie star and a cocotte, they play at court intrigue. How, Frau Goebbels, does it happen that I observe 3 official cars constantly at the disposal of your husband, when he is actually entitled only to 2? But this is the way they all are. The pose of revolutionaries, de facto dirty little bourgeoisie who cannot rid themselves of the feel of the dog collars they wore only yesterday, and who, the candles burned low and the food partly eaten, have seated themselves at the table of their evicted lords. On the way home, I heard the latest scandal. The first year after they came to power, the Nazis proclaimed that dueling belonged to the natural rights of every man, a consistent extension of the philosophy of 1789, and with much fanfare announced that all classes of society now had state approval for this method of solving differences. Any difference of opinion between master and servant over badly polished shoes could be resolved with pistols. But the very first duel held under the new dispensation has struck down one of their own, and by an ancient law, not the worst of the lot. Herr Roland Strunk, a journalist of a caliber that exceeded their usual level of the schoolmaster gone berserk, as far as I know, a decent chap, a man of some quality. Strunk, then, discovered one day that a fellow party member, a young lout, was carrying out Nazi tenets on sexual unrestraint by sleeping with Strunk's daughter. He called the fellow out and was killed. The dueling regulation has now been rescinded. Now, a mere challenge has been made punishable by a heavy prison sentence, and the danger that a man may have to receive his chauffeur's seconds because he complained of his badly washed car has been set aside. I had a disagreement about this policy with Clemens von Frankenstein, whom much traveling about has made into a skeptic. I have just finished Action for Slander, a novel in which two English cavalry officers seek satisfaction over an argument at baccarat, first by boxing, and then by taking the matter to court, without the officers being suspended, and without the writer, Mary Borden, being able to give her bemused non-English readers so much as an inkling of what her two main characters might be like. Now, I am far from being an advocate of the well-known idiotic student bloodletting, but I cannot possibly ignore the fact that since 1918, and the official ban on dueling, there has come about a complete Bolshevization of all standards of honor, and that a man's good name has become free game. Any libeler does not now have to fear the serious consequences that would have followed in the past, and this did not begin with the Nazis. Let no one, please, answer me with the ancient objection that generally the lie emerges for what it is. To take a libeler to court is really giving a small devil more than his due, besides which, when a defamation case involves family honor and the most private matters, a duel becomes an infinitely more human expedient than exposing the entire inner workings of one's home and life to newspaper stories, and oneself to running the gauntlet of the clacking tongues in the streets. We have witnessed an appalling decline in European mores these last 30 years. We shall have to take care not to sink even lower. On the way home, I went through Munich, a city which I avoid as much as possible since its occupation by the Prussians. It was so gay and so brilliant, once. Not long ago the periphery of the city was untouched meadowland, stretches of bucolic peacefulness unlike anything else in Germany. This has been ruined by the depositing of hills of gravel, by the cutting down of the forests, by railroad spurs, and by monstrous industrial plants which the General Staff, with characteristic barbarian inability to understand that some things are irreplaceable, had finally brought here too. No, I no longer recognize Munich as the gay, high-spirited city of youth and happiness that it once was, never actually a big city, it was really only the main town of a land of peasants and farmers. Now, wide-hipped females, wives of the Prussian bureaucrats who are overrunning Bavaria, push their baby carriages past the facade of the Florentine Palace on Ludwigstrasse, and everywhere in the hotel corridors one sees in front of doors the repulsive jackboots of the newly promoted officers with their sergeants' faces. The Hoftheater, which in the last 3 years, since Frankenstein's departure, has sunk, really, to the level of a fourth-rate touring company, is packed with herds of BDM, Bund Deutscher Mädchen, League of German Maidens, bleach blondes, and the hotels are crowded with the wives of North German factory managers, the bane of every porter's existence, keeping their rendezvous with Nazi gangsters. No, I want to see nothing more of this city ruined by Prussian barbarism until the day of release. While in the once secluded Hofgarten, where, incidentally, Herr Hitler wants to build the greatest opera house in the world by having the arcades and Rotman frescoes removed, the painter Ziegler was pointed out to me. He has been assigned by Hitler to cleanse German art of all decadence and is, therefore, something like the chief among all German painters, a man with no back to his head. He holds the title of Master of Female Pubic Hair, conferred on him by his associates in view of his predilection for this kind of representation. And so it goes in Munich. The general feeling about the systematically pursued Prussianization of the city has, moreover, been shown in an occurrence which in the days of the old regents 30 years ago would have been dismissed as incredible. The outlying districts of Heidhausen and Giesing, Munich's lively and alley-filled versions of Whitechapel, have for some time been made unsafe by a group of adolescents banded together under the sign of the Red Anchor, who have launched a campaign of terror against all wearing Nazi uniforms. Provided one does not break the taboo against speaking North German dialect here, he can with a quiet heart traverse Giesing wearing a fur coat and top hat, and he will not be troubled. The Red Anchor lays hands only on uniformed Nazis, and especially members of the SS. All this is in no wise to be dismissed as harmless rowdyism, since the Red Anchor is said to be responsible for a number of killings. The police have recovered the corpses of several SS members, and connected the murders with the Honorable Brotherhood. The comedy here is that the entire band has been recruited from young fellows, de facto anti-Nazis, who were forced into the Hitler Youth and are now playing double roles. But what verges on the incomprehensible is that in circumstances that approach those of the Chicago underworld, the leader of the organization is supposed to be a Munich lawyer, this in our light-hearted basically good-humored city, over which just 2.5 decades ago a dignified old patriarch held sway. Truly, a devil has broken loose from his leash in Germany, and we none of us know how we are to get him back on the chain again.